Hi there, this is my channel, Yaru Walks. In the year 2024, I will embark on an epic walking journey across the United States. I plan to hike 8,000 miles and to cross the US 3 times, via the Appalachian Trail, Pacific Crest Trail, and Continental Divide Trail. In the hiking world, this is known as a calendar year Triple Crown and has been completed by only a handful of hikers in history. The calendar year Triple Crown has traditionally been completed by jumping within or between the trails throughout the year, primarily to avoid snow, but also to avoid other seasonal hazards such as floods, extreme desert heat, and wildfires. For my attempt, I'm trying to hike each trail on a continuous, unbroken, end-to-end footpath, and to accomplish this, I must hike across all 4 seasons. I will be posting weekly updates along the way, so you can join me for the journey. Wish me luck.
All right, I'm leaving Rollins. I dodged the snowstorm last night, and I'm back into the awful winds, which are gonna last for 3 consecutive days. So this is where I slept last night. I set my ground sheet and my pad, sleeping bag up right in this little drainage tunnel that runs under the road that I'm walking, which is right up there. Can't quite tell, but it's set a good ways down off the road. And so I was thinking, you know, if I could fit in this pipe, the benefit of setting up in this pipe was that I didn't have to set my tarp up. And so that saves me like probably about 30 minutes in the morning and in the evening, setting it up and taking it down. And so anyway, the wind when I set up last night was totally blocked off by the road over here because the wind's blowing towards me. But then at some point around 2 in the morning in the night, the wind shifted to where it's blowing right through the tunnel, and it's coming through faster than it would normally because it's squeezing through the tunnel. And so then at that point, I pulled my bivvy out of my bag. I had to get entirely out of the tunnel, pull the sleeping bag out of the tunnel, and then get into the sleeping bag, and then pull the bivvy up and over the sleeping bag, and then like caterpillar my way back in on top of the sleeping pad. Because there's not enough space to like scrunch up, you know, and then like even turn around in there. You have to go out the way you came in. And so anyway, just so once I set the bivvy bag up, you could hear the wind rushing over me, but not through my sleeping bag. So the bivvy bag, which I've been carrying but have not really had to use yet, came in super handy. And it was so beneficial last night that, you know, it literally does make it worth it to carry it. Because nights like that would have been absolutely miserable without it, because the wind was just blowing right through my sleeping bag. Now another day of walking into a 30-mile-per-hour wind. And I've turned off of it now onto this dirt road. And really the most special part about this turn off is that I now have the wind pushing more at my back rather than more in my face, which is nice. It has been miserable having that wind just shoving in my face all day for 3 days now. First view of the Rockies. I'm working my way through the middle of nowhere, and there's a house out in the middle of nowhere. I'm pretty sure, like over 95% sure that I'm on public land, but it's always sketchy when you're in the middle of nowhere and you gotta walk by someone's house. All right, I'm on the other side of that house now. There was definitely somebody home because I could see the lights in the window flickering from a television. It's definitely the kind of house where you don't want to find out if you are on private property or public property. You can see it's not quite visible. That's the floodlight that they had in their yard. The house sits below this hill here. There's another hill on the other side. So there's a main road out here. By main road, I'm sure it's a dirt road, but that house is not visible from even this crazy remote road. So whoever lives there does not, they could be totally nice, but that house was put there, because they don't want to be around people, I presume, because, I'm hiking and I feel like I'm in the middle of nowhere, and that house is not even visible from the nearest road based on exactly where they positioned it. It's funny, I'm almost visible. I'm being lit up by the moonlight. And so anyway, there's a story that I want to share that happened a couple of days ago, but I have not had the opportunity to, because I've either been what you would call stress hiking, where you're just super dialed into just getting to where you're going, or if there was a moment the wind was drowning out the microphone and it just wasn't the right time to tell about this experience that I had. So it's like 4 days ago, I think it was like 2 days before coming into Rollins. There are more factors going on here. This lady ended up actually helping me by finding my mittens way down the road that I had dropped on the road and I wasn't able to get back to because they were so many miles back, but she brought them back to me. So shout out to her, and I'm thankful to her. And I will also say to all the people who in the last week have stopped to check in to make sure I'm all right, ask if I need anything, because the people out here know how remote this place is and honestly are confused as to who I am and what I'm doing out here. But not in a suspecting, aggressive manner, which you can sometimes encounter on trail where people think you shouldn't be out somewhere. But anyway, this lady who found my mittens, I also had, an encounter with her that I found to be insightful and also honestly pretty frustrating. So when she first rolled up, she did have that attitude of kind of like she's the local, and she was kind of on a mission to find something that she could explain to me that I was doing wrong. And generally speaking, her attitude was that it seemed like that I shouldn't be out there, and that I'm like the inexperienced hiker who's out here late in the year who doesn't know what he's doing, was her assumption. And she mentions that she saw another hiker out a week earlier, which surprised her, but she hadn't seen anybody out there in the last month other than us two. And I mentioned, well, the guy who was out here a week ago was kind of on the same hike that I'm on, where we're going, it's over 7,000 miles this year. And the reason we're out late is because we've already hiked the entire American East Coast and West Coast. And the only reason I'm explaining that is to just give her new information, to put us in the context of yeah, we're out here late, but there's a very good reason why, and we're both very experienced hikers. And as I'm explaining this to her, she's just shaking her head left and right, like in disagreement. She's like, well, you're out here in a really remote spot. This is a really remote stretch. And I say, well, it's like, obviously I'm aware of that. Like, I got here on foot and I'm not dead. And at least that's what I'm thinking in my head. And I say, well, from my perspective, where I'm standing right now is actually not that remote. There's a highway 9 miles to my east. If I get into trouble, I could bushwhack right over to it. But if you'd met me 2 days earlier, I would agree with you. Because 2 days ago, I was 70 miles in any direction to the nearest town. But I feel like I'm re-entering civilization at this point. She's still shaking her head side to side. And I'm just confused why, I get why she would think this guy's an idiot and doesn't know what he's doing out here this late this time of year. But once I start to provide more information explaining kind of the context of my hike, you would think that this information would be relevant
and would transition her from shaking her head side to side to up and down and saying, oh, okay, that makes more sense now. But it was having no effect whatsoever. And so then she says, well, you know, there's a storm coming in tonight, right? And I actually don't. Now, it's not because I don't check the weather. I pull satellite updates every morning, afternoon, and evening. But my morning satellite update that showed, you know, there's a storm coming in tomorrow night, which I've been monitoring for several days now, but I had no awareness of any kind of a storm coming in that night. So I'm taken off guard and I say, no, actually I wasn't. She kind of smiles because she enjoys like informing me of something that I wasn't aware of, which again was her mission from the start. She's like, yeah, there's a big storm coming in tonight. She's like, do you have some way to get into town? And I'm like, well, I mean, like, there's a town, Bay Royal, up in 12 miles. I'm not trying to catch a ride into town. I'm trying to keep my footsteps moving. But if I need to, I can go into that town and there's a church where I can stay tonight. And she's like, yeah, that's probably a good idea. And then long story short, she drives off. And then I'm kind of like thinking like, I really don't think there's a storm coming tonight. So I double check and I pull a new satellite update. And then I pull, because I had one bar of cell signal out there, I pull an update from Apple and I pull an update from the National Weather Service. All three agree there's no storm that night, but there is a storm coming in the following night, the one that I've been monitoring for several days now. And so I'm annoyed because what if that lady pulled up to me and I didn't have a satellite communicator and I didn't have the one bar of data that I had? I would now have to operate based off of what she told me and default to assuming that she was correct. There had been a change in the forecast and I just hadn't received the update. So if that had been the situation, then I would have hiked 12 miles ahead to the town of Bay Royal and stayed the night there at that church. And that town is several miles off of the direct route into Rawlins. So the consequence of going to Bay Royal that night to seek shelter for the storm would have been that the following day I would not make it to Rawlins. And it's the following evening that I believe an actual snowstorm is coming in. And so after I pulled my 3 updates, I realized that lady's wrong. She just gave me wrong information. And, you know, randomly she comes driving up the road again, the opposite direction, and stops to say hi again. So I kind of ask her, I say, hey, you told me there's a storm coming in tonight. I have a satellite communicator. I just pulled an updated forecast. I've been watching it for 4 or 5 days now. There's a storm that's coming in tomorrow night. There's not a storm coming in tonight. I said I also double checked using Apple Maps and the National Weather Forecast, which I know to be extremely reliable. All 3 have different forecasting systems and all 3 agree no storm tonight, yes storm tomorrow night. And so then I say, where did you hear that there's a storm coming in tonight? Again, maybe there's something she's aware of that I'm not. I'm always open to that possibility. She says, well, I heard it on the radio. And I say, well, what did they say? What kind of storm did they say was coming in tonight? She's like, well, they said it was going to be a windstorm. And I'm like, it's a windstorm, not a rain or a snowstorm? She says, well, what you have to worry about here, it's not the snow, it's the wind. And I'm like, wind can't kill me. Rain and snow can kill me. Wind can't kill me. I'm not worried about the wind. I'm annoyed at this point. And she's like, well, yeah, I think there is a snowstorm coming in tomorrow night, but what I heard tonight is just the wind. And I'm like, okay, well, you know, it's important to understand that if you're talking to a hiker out here, you know, like, if I had listened to you, I would have bailed to this town tonight, and tomorrow night I would have been stuck in that snowstorm. But if I just continued with the plan that I had originally, which is what I was going to do anyway, because I got my new updates, I would have pushed hard tonight and pushed hard tomorrow, and I would have made it to Rawlins just in time to avoid the snowstorm. But instead, this lady whose mission it was to just inform me of something, anything, if she could find anything to explain to me how I'm doing something wrong, she was going to feel good about it, you know. And it's just funny because in the interim where she had driven away before she had come back, you know, I got to thinking, and I was like, you know, from the moment she started talking to me, she was trying to explain to me how I was doing something wrong. But everything she explained to me, I explained to her with information and facts from my perspective in terms of what I'm capable of, how none of those things were concerns. And the whole time she's shaking her head side to side, not taking in that new information, just disregarding it, which is indicative of someone who's not really going to be a reliable narrator. And so, in that type of a situation where you're not totally sure, because again, I pull my forecasts, but I'm still left wondering, what on earth did that lady hear that made her think there's a storm coming in tonight? So there's still a seed of doubt in my mind. But, if there were a way to kind of read into it further, a really valuable thing to have observed would have been that when I was initially talking to her, she was looking to find something wrong. And when I provided her with what I would call reassuring, information that I in fact do know what I'm doing out here, rather than taking that information in and processing it, she just kept shaking her head. I could realize at that point, she's not really kind of a reliable narrator. She's on some odd mission to kind of like get off on feeling like she helped me in some way. Even if that comes at the price of kind of feeding me an exaggerated forecast that actually puts me in harm's way. And so it's bizarre that you meet people out here like that, but it's actually a fairly common occurrence that you'll meet people who will stop, chat with you, and then they want to quickly establish, their local knowledge, or, assert their hiking knowledge, to get off on this idea of like they're explaining or they're informing you of something, when in reality, the information they're feeding you might be relevant to someone who can only hike a few miles a day, but is not relevant to someone who can hike 30 miles a day, because those are totally different environments. Like if there's a snowstorm rolling in 2 days and I'm 70 miles to the next town, to someone who can only hike a couple of miles a day, that's like a week away. To me, that's 2 days away, And so it's really hard. It's not just that it's hard for some people to relate to a thru hiker on foot. There are just certain people in the world whose mission it is to get off on informing you of something you didn't know, even when they don't have that card in their hand. And also, what a bizarre thing, just what a bizarre mission to be on in the first place. I met so many people on the AT who were day hikers and had some insecurity about, again, this sounds like made up or almost egocentric on my part, but this is just what I observed. They have some insecurity about the fact that they themselves have not thru hiked the AT, but they do come out and do a lot of day hikes on it. And so then they're trying to inform you, about how like the mission you're on is doomed to failure. Like the White Mountains will be impassable, or it's too early, there's going to be too much snow, here or there. You might as well just get off the trail for a month and come back when it's easier. These people are telling you how it's not going to work. They're being critical of what you're doing, and they're almost like playing it off like you're just kind of naive or ignorant. And it's just funny because hindsight is 2020, and all those people were wrong. And I never had the attitude, oh, you're all wrong, you don't know what you're talking about. My attitude was, I'll just find out when I get there. Like the motto of Giffo, I guess I'll find out. My attitude was not, oh yeah, the whites are going to be passable. I just figured, let me go there, walk into them and find out, okay, it's too hard, too dangerous, I'll back out. But I never found that on the East Coast this year. Everything wound up being passable. And so anyway, the moral of the story is, as a thru hiker, once you've reached a certain level of experience, over 1,000 miles of thru hiking or something, trust your own competence. And trust that a lot of these people, it's not trust, like to say trust is the wrong word. Just understand that a lot of day hikers who you'll meet, or just locals who you'll meet, more than you would think, have a mission to establish some sense of superiority over you, through their knowledge, and nearly universally are wrong. If it's something like you're not going to make it because the bridge over that river got knocked out this last winter, and maybe you didn't hear about that, that's really valuable local knowledge. Maybe you didn't know that. But otherwise, if it's like, oh man, just you wait for these cliffs in Pennsylvania, well, yeah, climbing a cliff in Pennsylvania is kind of hard from a local perspective, but once you've hiked thousands of miles, and you compare the cliffs in Pennsylvania that run for a third of a mile to, I don't know, like the 2-mile massive inclines in the White Mountains that run for hundreds of miles, you realize, only once you have that perspective where you've walked that yourself, can you begin to understand how, from a thru hiker's perspective, those cliffs in Pennsylvania, you might even hike through them while on a daydream and not even register them. But, at least in my mind, I would think nobody's going to daydream their way up and down the mountains in the White Mountains. But, a local or a day hiker's just, because they don't have those thousands of miles under their feet, is not going to be able to appreciate what it's like in your body to hike what you're hiking. And likewise, some local in southern Wyoming who's trying to point out all the problems and why, what you're doing is incredibly dangerous and doomed to failure, cannot relate to, what it's like to be able to move 30 miles a day and to have already experienced all sorts of desert, long water carry situations, and have already hiked in very cold temperatures in other places in the US. So anyway, moral of the story is always listen to the locals, because sometimes they will have insider information on something recent. But at the same time, trust your competence and understand that even when you meet that local who speaks with the highest confidence in the world, if your competence says that what they're telling you is wrong, man, 29 times out of 30, you're right. So go with what you think is right. All right, so this is a little exciting. I have a river here that's frozen. The ponds and the rivers are all starting to freeze over now. It's been consistently cold for a week or two. And I'm having to bang through the ice to get water. But my problem out here is that there's no bridge across this water source. And it's frozen. So I don't know how deep it is or how fast it's flowing under, but it looks pretty stagnant. And this is the narrowest point in the river right here. So I guess we'll just see what happens. Alrighty. Oh, you can see it just cracked. Made it. I'm pretty sure I'm on a public road again. I'm talking about a house, I'm just gonna act like I know what I'm doing. Because I kind of do. All right, I'm walking my way now into the town of Riverside, my next food resupply. Riverside marks the beginning for me of the Sierra Madre Mountains. The official CDT route is somewhere right up on that ridge line. And my plan is just to hike, come into town, have dinner, resupply, and then hike right up and into the mountains out the back of the town. Glad I'm not in that rainstorm, or what might be a snowstorm. Hard to tell. You can see there's pretty much snow falling in every direction except for where I am right now. I spoke too soon, the snow has arrived. It's funny, I've been monitoring the forecast closely, and I actually cowboy camped last night because there was no forecast of snow or any precipitation that I saw, and now it's snowing today, which indicates to me the weather up in the mountains is very erratic. So I think I'm gonna have to deploy my bivvy and my tarp every night going forward, just in case something like this rolls in at night. That would have not been fun last night if this had come in, you know. All right, into the Medicine Bow National Forest. So right now, I'm walking I guess in another state I would think of as a logging road. This is just a mountain access road. The official CDT route is a couple miles over to my west. This road parallels the CDT. CDT is at an elevation of right around 9,500 feet over there, and over here I'm also at 9,500 feet. The difference is that this road has some level of vehicle traffic on it, which pushes the snow down and makes it much faster to hike. Also, in the event that I were to get into trouble and I needed assistance, it's a million times easier for someone to get up to me right here on this road than it would be to get to me, you know, off in the mountains on the trail. All right, unfortunately there's a blizzard up here today, and it's already dropped about 3 inches of snow, and the tire tracks that I had are totally gone. I was not expecting this weather to come in today. It was not in the forecast. I feel like I'd be safe to continue on this road, but I honestly am feeling anxiety right now, and I have another 80 miles to go through the mountains. I'm wondering, there's another road that's further off that might be more established, but this road honestly just has me a little freaked out. Like, if it continues to snow, I could get in a situation where I'm kind of like stuck trudging. And as of right now, like, that's just not really a risk I am going to take. So I don't know, the weather looks a lot better back that way. I'm kind of stuck right now trying to decide what I want to do. I just wasn't really, I don't know, it's kind of silly, but I wasn't expecting a giant snowstorm to hit, you know, my first day into the mountains. But obviously that is a total possibility. I just I just feel a little spooked right now. So I don't know, I think I might have to do some more intel on road conditions. Yeah, I'm just not really sure what makes the most sense, but I feel like I've been trudging along, making pretty good pace, and I'm just a little concerned. Yeah, I don't know. I might have to do investigation by car just to get a sense of what these different roads look like, because I was just imagining better road conditions than this. Yeah, that was pretty eye-opening. It's always hard. It's actually not hard. It's hard to turn around. Like, actually, it's not hard to turn around. It doesn't feel good turning around, but it's always clear, or it's always been clear to me when it's time to turn around. And there have been moments this year where I was very close to turning around. And there have been a couple of moments where I actually turned around. The first one was hiking from Canada to Mount Katahdin when I was initially trying to do a winter southbound of the AT. I turned around about halfway up Mount Katahdin, and it was just abundantly clear. You know, you feel, it's like a feeling inside where you're like, boom, next thing you know, you're walking this way, 20 seconds later, you're walking this way, now the other way. But it's a core body feeling. And so anyway, I felt that feeling on Katahdin. I felt that feeling slowing my footsteps as I hiked my way up and into the Smokies when they were covered in snow. But at every point, I did feel okay to continue ahead. And a big part of that was that I had those lean-tos to seek shelter in. So I proceeded ahead. And then the next time that I really got throttled, that way was going through Vermont, especially those first 4K peaks, and especially Mount Killington. I almost bailed on the AT at that point. I had actually decided one night when I was at the peak of Killington that I was going to basically get off the AT, fly over, and start the PCT. It wasn't until the following morning that I basically got new information where I found water and I found a much better trail down the other side of the mountain that I continued ahead. And it's so wild how close I came to ending the continuous footpath attempt at that point. But I made it down. The next time I felt that feeling was walking into the White Mountains. That was where I felt it the strongest at that point, other than being at Mount Katahdin here. And that feeling pretty much persisted the entire way through the White Mountains until I had made it down the backside of Mount Washington. At that point, I think I had uncertainty hiking all the way into Washington, and as I did more and more peaks, I got more and more comfortable with what I was doing. But there was always a question mark of, what is this Mount Washington going to be like? I've just heard so much about it that it seemed different from all the other mountains in the Whites, and it was. But I made it through. And so then the last couple of mountains in the Whites were, what were they, like Carter, Wildcat, Carter, and then Mariah. It's crazy, my recall. I mean, every one of those was just such an intense episode. I think I could list every peak of the Whites in order, just because I spent so much time on them, and each one was just another scary name. There's something different about each of them that's scary. And anyway, once I came down the backside of Washington under that Aurora Borealis, I knew that I could make it through those last three. I just had the total conviction, I know where to expect the snow. I know how to navigate bail routes if I need to, so on and so forth. So then I hiked the PCT, and I almost was like bored for the first half of it, because there is such an element of thrill to safely navigating the AT northbound in the winter, and moments of uncertainty where you have to walk right up to that edge of danger, and then to continuously see like, oh no, this is actually doable. This is actually doable. But you're so uncertain as to what you're about to find, and you tend to just imagine worst case scenario, and it ends up being incredibly hard, but it was possible to do it basically safely while monitoring for many different factors. So then the next time I felt that feeling was approaching the park fire, the 1,000 square mile wildfire I remember like when the clouds, I say clouds, when the smoke lowered to about half a mile off the ground, you know, and the sun setting and the whole world lit up this weird, almost Martian orange. It's like, whoa, this fire is powerful. But then I found a hikeable route that looked safe as long as I monitored certain factors. And I was able to push around that. And then the next time I felt fear was honestly just starting the CDT, because it's like you don't know when winter's going to hit, and there are all these long stretches, and I've heard that the trail disappears and stuff. And so I was just like hiking on anxiety through Glacier, but I felt safe going through Glacier. And then I met about 5 or 6 CDT northbound hikers who were just finishing up the entire trail, and I was able to chat with them to get a sense of like what to expect ahead. And after talking to them, I felt just much better informed. I was like, okay, I think I'm going to be good for a while. But you know, from talking to them, I remember talking to one guy, and I was like, what about the winds? And then he's like, the winds could be a problem. That's exactly how he phrased it. The winds could be a problem. Turned out he was right. I was expecting a road like this, to be honest. Maybe with little bits of snow, but I wasn't expecting what I just saw, which was the beginning of a winter hellish landscape. But that's just my best ability this year to kind of like point out there have been moments where I actually had to turn around, like on Mount Katahdin in the Wind River Range, and just now coming into the Sierra Madre Mountains. But in each case, I don't think there's ever been a place where I turned my back on it from the start, if that makes sense. Like, I always walked up to see for myself, and then in each moment, you know, had faith in my ability to call each situation, you know, in a safe manner. And so far, I think my track record is 3 for 3 on that, on Katahdin, the winds, and just now the Sierra Madres. And there have been so many situations this year where you have, I think, a high level of anxiety walking into a situation, but then it turns out that you had catastrophized the situation, and that's not actually what I found, and it enabled me to hike all these different scenarios, like hiking the Smokies in 2 feet of snow, hiking the Whites in 3 feet of snow, let's say like 1 to 3 feet of snow, hiking around the 1,000 square mile park fire. Anyway, there have been all these places throughout the year where I think my nerves got tested, and it's pretty awesome that each time I walked right up to the edge to see what was possible. And by walking up to the edge, I was quite literally able to expand the realm of what felt possible. And I think that only happens when you actually walk up to the edge and actually see from yourself, rather than turn away from it before you get to it. Because there are all these situations where your judgment might say that seems too dangerous, but it actually, in fact, turns out to be totally doable. I think that's been, honestly, a really special part of this year, is walking up to those edges. You'll get pushback from people who say what you're doing is crazy and just wildly dangerous, which sounds egocentric or something, but I'm just telling you that that's factual. I've received that feedback from some people. And the analogy I use is like, you know, when you walk across a bridge, you're able to walk right up to the edge of it and look over, you know, and it would be really dangerous if you jumped off the bridge, but as long as you're right up on that edge, you're pretty good. I mean, you're not pretty good, we all feel safe. And on a certain level, when you're out here hiking, if you have the right gear, the right mindset, and know things pretty well, to me it feels very similar, at least in my world when I'm walking, very similar to walking up to the edge of that bridge. The key thing is you have to be willing to turn back when you see that the drop off on that bridge is too high. And so that's what I just saw back there. So anyway, I think this is like, now that I got some phone charge, this is just me processing out loud where my head's at. So basically, I have to, at this point, find another road that will go into Colorado that is a plowed road. I think that's key. It has to be plowed for me to have any kind of a shot of working my way safely into Steamboat. So I think tonight we'll be getting dinner in Riverside and relaxing, and then tomorrow I'll have to scout by vehicle the other roads to see, where the nearest road is that's actually passable.